everyone, good morning. So today's session, we're going to take a look at an overview of the MyCalls area of SalesEye. As always, I'm logged onto our demo system, which is showing dummy data, and that's based on a builder's merchant. But the functionality will be the same across all cubes, so you guys, when you log in to see your data, will have the same functionality. So we'll just jump across to the MyCalls section and wait for that to load. And while that is loading, I'll just say, as we go through today's session, if you have any questions at all, I've got my colleague on the live chat, so feel free just to go ahead and ask those questions as we're going through, type them in, and we'll get you an answer as and when. So the MyCalls area of SalesEye, this way you can add and track any notes of any conversations that you're having with your customer base. So there's a couple of different calls that we can make. And when we say calls, when it comes to MyCalls, what we're referring to is, yes, telephone calls, as you'd expect, but also that can refer to any face-to-face visits, any emails, any pertinent information that you're sharing with your customers that you think is important to note down somewhere. Anything that you would note in your diary, jot down on a piece of paper, you'd want to put into SalesEye. So there's two really overarching types of calls that you can make. There's the planned call. So we can see in my diary I've got some calls planned in for today. Just like today's session, we planned to be here and we showed up on time and it was scheduled into our diaries for a particular time. And there's also the reactive call. So the call that you didn't plan to make but happened anyway. So maybe you're driving past a particular company and you think you might just call in and see how they are. That's not something that you planned to do. It's not something you put in your diary, but it is something you'd want to make a note of. Likewise, if a customer calls in to you, an inbound call, it's not something that you had planned, but you can still make a note of it in SalesEye. So those two different types of calls, that planned call and that reactive call. So we're going to start by looking at those planned calls because I've got some scheduled into my diary for today. And what we're looking at, when I've loaded my MyCalls area, at the moment I'm looking at my list view. So seeing my calls that I've got in my diary for the day as a list. If you're one that prefers to view things as a calendar, to plan ahead, see how you're doing in the future, there's a little tab and the next one along shows you the follow-up calendar, any calls that you've got planned into your diary for the future. And again, you can change to a day view, just looking at today, or a week view to look at any calls that you've got in the future. So that's a nice way to prepare for your month or your week and plan. I'm going to go back to our list view and just explain the different areas we have here. So we're currently looking at our today list. And this is our list of calls that we've got planned into our diary for the day. So I've got 4 calls in there, 4 calls that I've got to make, but the times listed, the company that I'm having that conversation with, and the contact at the company that I'm speaking with as well. The next button along is our outstanding list. Now, your outstanding list is anything that you've not actioned. So that can include, yes, today's calls, because they've not yet been actioned, but also anything in the past that I've yet to action. So if there was a call that I meant to make yesterday but never got around to, that would stay in my outstanding list until I actioned it. So make sure that nothing slips through the net, and we're always up to date on our calls. The next one along, pretty self-explanatory, our planned calls. So any calls that we've got planned from tomorrow and into the future would appear as a list here. So I can see I've got 200 calls planned into my diary. The first one is at 9:35 a.m. tomorrow. Guys, the aim is to have your outstanding list as close to 0 as possible and your planned calls as many as possible. And we'll go through how you can action your calls in your diary. So looking at our planned calls, we can take a look at the information for the call that we've got scheduled. So I'll take this one here with Beaumaris Instrument Company, and I can click onto that one to highlight them. And on the right-hand side, information just suddenly gets populated on the right-hand side. So I can see useful information listed here. Obviously, I can see the customer name. I can see the type of call that I'm having with them. And something that you might have noticed is my type of call is a business review. And this little color coding on the side, that relates to the call type that I've inputted into this call. That's something that my power user, my admin user, has set up for me. And I can see this one, a pink one, I know just from looking at it that that is a general sales call, because that's the color coding system that we use in our business. So I can see the type of call immediately just from looking at the color coding. I can see the contact with whom I'm going to be having this conversation. And I can see the last note that was added onto the system. So in this case, I can see that this is a SalesEye auto-generated call, and it was generated from a campaign. So customers buying decking but have not bought any railing. So straight away I can take a look at that, and I've got something to talk about with Anne Drever when I call her. Now, anytime that we want for you to do anything in SalesEye, we try to make it a nice and easy big green button. So there's a few things that I want to do. I'll say I'm going into this call with Beaumaris Instrument Company. I want to make a note of this conversation that I've had with them about the fact that they're buying decking but not buying railing. And I also want to set a follow-up call into the future with them. And then lastly, I want to tick this off my list of things to do because I've done it. I've actioned it. I want to get rid of it out of my outstanding list, get that as close to zero as possible. So, like I say, big green button. We've got this button here, add account call. So 5:05. I've had this call with Beaumaris Instrument Company. I can click add account call to make a note of that information. So first thing I want to do is just down at the bottom, add a note in. So I can say, spoke about railing, wants a demo on products A, B, and C. So she's asked for me to go back and demo those railing products with her. No problem, I can do that. I can schedule a follow-up call into the diary for the future. And I can do that from here, the follow-up call. What am I going to do with them next? So I need to check that to say, yes, I do want to have a follow-up call with them. And then I can start to change the diary for the future. So I'm going to go and see them next week, the 28th, at 10 o'clock in the morning. And this is where we can start to narrow things down and help me out. In a week's time, my memory's not great. I'm gonna help myself out and categorize this call accordingly. I can do this just by going through from the top to the bottom. I'm going to walk through these. So we've got the call type. Remember, that relates to any color coding that we have in the system. If you do have that set up, bear that in mind. So the type of call that we've had. This is just a general sales call. So I'm going to pop that in as a general sales call there. Your call date, something that's really important to bear in mind with this. Your call date is the timestamp of when the current call is happening. So I'm talking to them about railing. I know that they've bought decking but not bought railing. That is the timestamp of the conversation that I've just had with them. I do not need to change that. The call date, leave that alone. You can leave that as it is. The follow-up call, this is what's going to drive your diary. That's what's going to be put into your future diary. Call date is just the timestamp of the current call. Call duration, how long did you spend with them? I was on the call for 15 minutes. What was the outcome of that call? Yep, there was an opportunity identified. I need to go in and do a demo on those products. And what's the next action? So I'm going to go and call them back. And that just makes my life easier in the future when I come and look at that next call. So once you're happy, big green button, top right-hand corner, we click Save. Great. So I've done everything that I wanted to do. I've made a note of the conversation that I've had. I've scheduled a follow-up call into my diary. You can see the planned calls are now at 201 rather than just 200. And I can see if I scroll down, I can find my call for the 28th. There it is, with Anne Trevor. So I can see that's my future call in my planned calls list. I can see it's a general sales call that I'm going to be having. What was the next action from the last call? I just need to give them a call back, and that was the last note that I added. So I've done everything that I needed to do. So going back to my list of things to do for today, I don't need to do that anymore. I've done it. So the last thing that I need to do is tick it off my to-do list. And like I said earlier, big green button, anything we need to do. We've clicked this one already to add the account call. The last thing we need to do is archive the call. Now what that does is get rid of that call out of your list of things to do for the day. So now my calls have gone down from 4 to 3. It's not deleted the call. It's not deleted any information about the call that's been had. That is still there. I can still find that information. The only thing it's done is just taken it out of my list of things to do for the day because I've done it. So I don't need it there anymore. If you ever do want to get your archived calls back, that is possible. And you can do that by using your filter section. So using your filter, you can switch over to your archived calls to view them. Use the apply filter, and I can see my archived calls, so my calls that I have completed. I'm going to switch that back to my inbox for things to do today. So that's adding our planned call. Now, what about those reactive calls? Someone's called me, an inbound call, and I need to make a note of that conversation that I've had. Well, in that case, obviously it's not something you'd select from your list of things to do for today because you didn't plan to do it. You'd want to click Add New Call. By doing that, it brings up a pop-up window and asks you to, first of all, to search for. It will drop down to select whether or not you want to search for a customer or a prospect. So I can search for my customer name. This searches for the name itself. So the customer I'm looking for is Wilson and Payne. For this customer, I can see full or a partial search. I've just searched for Wilson. I can see Evans Wilson, Hanson and Wilson, Wilson and Payne. There we are. That's the one that I want. So I can click onto that. And once I click onto that customer, here's this very familiar screen. Exactly the same screen as we've seen before. So again, what was the type of call that we've had? The call date, remember, is your timestamp for the current call. You don't need to change that. What was the outcome of the call? Now this I do need to change because we had an outcome. So there was something that we needed to, an opportunity that we identified. What's the next action? Okay, we need to schedule that follow-up call with them. So again, I'm going to put something into my diary for the future. If I didn't need to call them back, then I wouldn't need to schedule a follow-up call. I could just add this note onto the system, and that would be just exist on the system. But for now, I'm going to say, yes, I will follow up with them. I'll follow up with them later on today. Sorry guys, I'm in the evening time for me, so I'm just going to say it's 6 p.m. and then add my note in. Again, big green button right up in the top right-hand corner. I can save that. So what I've done now is I've made a note of the conversation that I've had with them, and I've also scheduled a follow-up call in with them. And that was all a reactive call, so nothing that I had planned in my diary to do. Wilson and Payne, Betsy Mimi from Wilson and Payne called me, and so I made a note of that call by clicking Add Call. Now it's available there for me to do. Later on today, I can get to this, see the note that I just added in, what am I talking to them about, add the account call, and then archive the call off once I've actioned it. If I do need to see any other history of any conversations I've had with them, I can access that from here. So I've got the account call history, and from there I can view any conversations that I've had with Betsy about anything else that we've spoken about. You see that just as a nice list. So a useful area that you can find. Good. So we've looked at planned calls, we've looked at reactive calls. Now we're just going to take a look at how we can generate a bulk load of calls based on some parameters that we can set. And that's how we're going to end the session for today. And we can do that by using this little magic wand up in the top hand corner called generate. And what this is going to do is generate a bulk load of calls. So I know I'm going out to Chicago next week. I'm going to visit just one customer, but I know that we've got a few other customers in the Chicago area. So while I'm there, I'm just going to pop some calls into my diary and make sure that I give them a call. Maybe I can go and call in with them and visit them face to face while I'm in the area. Why not? So I can do that. I click generate calls. This is going to just give me a couple of questions to answer. So first question, is it a customer or is it a prospect that I'm going to see? I'm going to say I want a list of customers. How many calls do you want put into your diary? I'm just going to go for a nice round number, 5 calls into my diary. When do you want them in your diary? If you were going next week, you can put them in your diary for next week. But for me, I'm just going to leave them as the current date and time. A time interval. So how often do you want these calls to go into your diary? So they'll start at 5:15 and they'll happen every 10 minutes. You can change that every 20 minutes. They go into my diary. Ignore days is quite a powerful one. What this does is it says, look, if someone's been contacted in the last 7 days, don't put them into my diary. I don't want to over call them. I don't want to call them once every 7 days or every 14 days. They've been contacted. I don't need to contact them again. And then I can say, because myself, I'm logged in as a power user, so an admin user, I can say, do I want for these calls to be allocated to myself, or do I want to allocate them to another person? So I could allocate them out to my colleague, Ollie. He's over in Chicago. I'm going to put these calls into his diary. I won't do that. I'm going to save that just for myself. I'm going to put these as me that's making the trip, so I'm going to put them into my diary. And then I've got this filter here. I can filter by basic. That's just very basic for me, too basic. So that just says that any of my customers at all, I'm going to put them into my diary, 5 customers, and pick them. And it says I will pick them on the biggest fall in spend, so the biggest variance, negative variance in spend. I can do it based on a campaign if I wanted to. So if there was a particular campaign that I wanted to use, so I had that one pop up earlier, customers buying decking but not buying railing, I could do that. But the one I want is based on a location. So you can do it based on a zip code if you wanted to. I'm going to go down to a city. I'm going to put in the city of Chicago. So I'm ready to confirm this selection of customers. So I click confirm and it gives me this option. I can either generate, just trust the system to put 5 calls into my diary, or I can preview and edit those calls. Likewise, if I'm not quite happy with the parameters I've set, I can cancel and go back and change those parameters. I'm going to say, yep, I'm happy with those parameters. I'm going to preview and edit. So I can see these are 5 customers in the Chicago area that have a large negative variance in sales value spend with us. Now, if I'm feeling particularly good, I've had my cup of coffee, I can say, well, actually, I'm going to add a couple of more in. I know that there's a couple that I do want to go and visit, then I can just check them in. Likewise, if there's a couple that I know, actually, Russell Care Homes, I know that I'm not going to see them because they're ones that don't accept face-to-face visits. So I'm just going to leave them alone. I can uncheck them to get them out of my list. So I've made a couple of changes. Now I'm going to click the big green button to generate those calls. So here we are. It says 8 calls generated. So I selected a few more. 8 calls generated to customers with a town of Chicago, but not accounts that have been called in the last 7 days. And there they are. So you can see them in my diary, just at the bottom of the screen on the left-hand side. So there's 8 calls that have been added into my diary every 20 minutes for me to call for today. So that's a useful way that you can generate bulk generate a bunch of calls, especially useful if you've got a parameters that you can set, a campaign that you can use to generate those calls from. And then you can go through and do exactly as we've done. So we've got planned calls. We can click Add Account Call, select your call type, leave your call date blank, leave it as it is. That's the timestamp for the current call. Select the outcome of the call and what's the next action. If you are going to follow up with them, make sure that you pop that call into your diary for the future. Your follow-up call is what drives your MyCalls diary. And then you're going to add that note in, save. Once you're done, you can archive the call off. So remember, there's just the basics of it, making sure you follow. Anytime there's a big green button, that's something that we want for you to do. So make sure you add the account call, save it, and then archive the call off to get it out of your outstanding list. Now, guys, we've had some good questions on the chat during the session. Keep those questions coming in. If you've got any further questions, please do get in touch with us. Get in touch with us via email. So it's webinars@sales-i.com. Get in touch with us if you have any further questions. We're happy to answer those. We're always happy to have those questions come through. Any feedback, if there's any areas of the system you want for us to do any training on, any sessions on, please let us know. We love that feedback to come through. We're always happy to hear that. Next session will happen in a couple of weeks' time. You can sign up for that via the support site. So remember, you've got your question mark. That's a quick link to the support site. Any upcoming webinars, you can register for those via that support site. The next session we'll be looking at autopilot. So we'll be looking at the autopilot feature of the SalesI app. That's Android and iOS. But until then, thank you for listening and have a good day.